The U.S. and Israel intensified airstrikes on Tehran last night. Inside Israel, public opinion about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's motives is complicated.
They see him waging this war because Iran is a threat, but that very conveniently, it is also helping him stay in power.
Plus, the key turning points in recent Iranian history.
The Iranian Revolution in the Islamic Republic could have taken multiple paths, and the path that it then takes is towards more radicalization.
And switching gears, a curling club from Spain gets in the game.
Jugarem, jugarem.
We will play, goes the chant. Plus, people are licking art in Berlin.
I was like, oh my God, what are you doing, people?
The sculptures are made from sugar, though. That's all ahead today on The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. Thank you for being with us this Friday. It has been quite a week, just 1 week, believe it or not, since U.S. and Israeli forces attacked Iran, unleashing a war with no clear end in sight. The only off-ramp, according to a social media post today from President Trump, would be an unconditional surrender by Iran. Even then, he has said Iran needs new leaders that he is involved in selecting. Last night, American jets carried out the most intense airstrikes on Tehran so far. The world's Shirin Jafari has been in touch with people in Iran, even though there's a near-total communications blackout there. She starts us off today.
For the past 7 days, nothing has been normal for Mehdi. Yet, that is slowly starting to shift, he says.
میدونی جنگه، میدونی هر لحظه ممکنه بدون هیچ اصلا حساب و کتابی.
He says, in the back of your mind, you know that there's a war going on. And at any moment, a bomb can land on your house or near your house and kill you. But you also slowly start to get used to it.
بلافاصله بعد هر انفجاری یه ترس مردم همه چی آرومه سر چهارراه.
After each strike, people are scared. And then, a few minutes later, life continues, he says. The flower seller goes about selling his flowers, and people go back to the stores to shop. Mehdi asked me not to use his last name for his safety. He's lived all his life in a densely populated area of Tehran. We've been in contact since the beginning of the war, and he's been sending me regular voice messages. He tells me he started to set himself a routine as a way to cope. So much of what happens is out of our control, he says. We have no choice but to adjust.
فضای امنیتی، گشت‌های بازرسی، آدمایی که بسیار به نظر میاد خشن‌تر و
One thing he's
وحشی‌تر از
noticed in the
قبل
past
بودن.
few days, he says, are the checkpoints that have popped up across town. Government supporters man them, he says, and they look angry and tense.
همه چی گرونتر شده خیلی چیزا نیست مثلا آب بدنی.
This woman who spoke on the condition of anonymity for her safety says some shops are open, but everything is more expensive. Stores are rationing bottled water, she says, and she worries about shortages if this war continues. Iran's Red Crescent Society has put the death toll from the Israeli-American strikes at around 1,000 people. In the lead-up to last night's barrage, the head of U.S. Central Command, Admiral Brad Cooper, warned Iranians in a press conference.
A lot of targets, the best thing for them to do for right now is just to lay low.
This video posted online shows destroyed buildings in the aftermath. People are rushing to the scene, looking through the rubble in search of survivors. The strikes have been intense elsewhere in the country as well.
After a week without any internet, I could just talk to my family a little bit today.
28-year-old Roya is a student in the U.S. She asked that I only use her first name to protect the safety of her family, who lives near Iran's border with Iraq. Roya belongs to the Kurdish minority in Iran, and her community has been thrust into the spotlight this week. The Trump administration says it wants the Kurds to help it overthrow the government in Tehran. American and Israeli forces have been bombing Kurdish areas near the border with Iraq, close to where Roya's family lives.
There is no shelter, there is no equipment to help them at all, and there might be some issues like those people who live next to the bases or police stations, and their infrastructures are damaged, like the roads, and people are really scared by the sounds of the bomb.
Roya says despite the horrors of war, she and her family are hoping the change in leadership in Iran will bring some freedom to minorities like the Kurds. Under the Islamic Republic, the Kurds were systematically discriminated against, she says.
All the time, Kurdish people have been oppressed by the dictators, different dictators throughout the time. And this is a time for them to gain a little bit of freedom.
She's quick to insist that she's not talking about separation, which some other Iranians accuse the Kurds of being after. Roya says she's been following the torrent of news about the war in between her studies. This week, when she heard the reports that the Trump administration wants to arm the Kurds in the fight against the government in Tehran, she had mixed feelings.
I am so proud of this statement that Mr. President has announced, and at the same time, I'm scared.
Scared, she says, because she wonders if cooperation with the Americans will eventually benefit her community. The Kurds in Syria fought alongside the U.S. against the Islamic State, but in 2019, Trump withdrew U.S. troops from northern parts of the country. That left the Kurds vulnerable to attacks by Turkish forces. Turkey sees the Kurds as a threat to its own security.
I feel like I don't want that to happen again to different Kurdish forces to defend Iran.
For now, Roya says she can only hope that this war brings a better future for her country. For The World, I'm Shirin Jafari.
We just heard the view from Iran. People in Israel are also feeling the impact of this war. Explosions shook Tel Aviv overnight with sirens and missile interceptions ongoing today. Israel's bombardment of Tehran and Beirut has not let up, so this incoming fire is retaliation. Reporter Noga Tarnopolsky in Jerusalem told me that for Israelis, daily life has come to a standstill.
There's been no school, no work. I went to the central market of Jerusalem today. It's a Friday morning tradition in the city, and it's normally bustling. And it was simply a ghost market this time.
What is Iran's strategy in striking Israel right now?
Well, I'm not in the head of Iran's leaders.
Sure.
But we are seeing something interesting here that differs greatly from what we saw last June, when Israel was under a sustained attack of these massive barrages, 80 missiles at once, 120 missiles at once. That's not what's happening now. Israel, especially the Israeli north, since yesterday, has been under a constant attack, but every time it's one missile or three missiles. Yesterday, we started to see coordinated attacks, so missiles launched by Hezbollah from Lebanon and from Iran simultaneously. In any event, it seems to be the case that Iran has decided this time to launch as many missiles as necessary to render normal life in Israel impossible, but at the same time to hold its fire and prepare itself for what may be a very long, sustained campaign.
I want to ask you about public opinion now. How supportive is the Israeli public of this war?
The Israeli public, by and large, is very supportive of this war when it's defined as a military action against Iran. The Israeli public, almost across the board, feels that Iran really does pose a threat and possibly an existential threat to Israel. We saw yesterday an Israel Democracy Institute poll that showed close to 80% of Israelis fully supportive of this war as a war against Iran. That said, you might think that that translates into support for this government or for Prime Minister Netanyahu personally, and very, very interestingly, it doesn't. The newspapers yesterday and today actually, have come out with the first political polls. Who would you vote for if an election were held today? And they simply haven't budged. So the Israeli public remains very skeptical and even disapproving of its current government, but does support a military campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Netanyahu has not taken any questions from the press since the war on Iran started. Is that typical in a time of conflict there?
Well, let's just say he did take questions from Sean Hannity, but he has not made himself available to the Israeli press, either in interviews or in a press conference. He also hasn't been seen in public. I don't know how to answer your question because I no longer know what is normal under these circumstances. Netanyahu does not have a spokesman, doesn't have a comms office in the Prime Minister's bureau, and that is slowly becoming also a matter of public polemic here.
Interesting. And it's an election year for Netanyahu, right?
It is an election year for Netanyahu and for Israelis. Under the law, Netanyahu has to hold an election by October 27th at the very latest. But I really feel obliged to point out that Netanyahu has all but declared that Israel no longer abides by the rule of law. There was an incident, a judicial incident 2 days ago, in which the Attorney General, who is clearly exasperated by Netanyahu's Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who has adopted authorities he does not have, she finally sent an advisory note to the Supreme Court saying, you're going to have to oblige the Prime Minister to fire him. And the Prime Minister responded in a statement saying, I'm not firing him. This is no less than saying, I won't abide by court rulings. So Israelis, at the same time that they're under attack by foreign enemies, are also being really, really pressured by an escalating campaign against the institutions of the state.
You've been saying things like Israelis are under attack. Israel launched this war. This is a war of choice. Are Israelis seeing themselves as the victims here or as the aggressor?
I'm not sure that Israelis see this as a war of choice. Israelis have taken very seriously Iran's threats to eradicate Israel. Iranian definitions of Israel as a cancer upon the world. These are things that have sunk very deep into the Israeli psyche. And I think that even Israelis who oppose this government accept that this was an opportunity to launch what the government called a preemptive strike. In terms of aggressor or victim, I think Israelis feel that they're paying a price for a just military campaign.
Politics are never far from politicians' minds. Do you think that this being an election year is factoring into, strategy about these strikes or Netanyahu's mentality in this conflict?
It's really hard to say. I've had more of a sense regarding this kind of secondary campaign in Lebanon that there are politics involved because Netanyahu wants to do anything possible to avoid having to call for an evacuation. But there's something beyond that. Yesterday, we were all witness to just an astonishing scene in which President Trump, in an interview to Axios, blasted the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, called him a disgrace, said that he had promised 5 times to pardon Netanyahu, who is on trial for corruption charges. Just intervened in the most brazen way in Israeli internal politics and in an Israeli judicial proceeding. And so the understanding here among many, many political observers is simply that, among other reasons, Netanyahu is waging war to try and get off his trial. There really is a sense that Prime Minister Netanyahu's personal politics are inexorably intertwined with the management and the politics of this war.
That's journalist Noga Tarnopolsky. She spoke to me today from Jerusalem. Just ahead, a taste of art in Berlin, but like a literal taste. This is The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. please don't touch the art. That is sort of a no-brainer at museums and exhibitions. But the problems facing Australian sculptor Joseph Marr take the need for that rule to another level. The Berlin-based artist regularly has to deal with people licking his sculptures because for over a decade, his medium has been sugar.
When you have a craving and you go to the shop and you buy lollipops, it has that attractive, glistening, colourful side of it. And I thought making a human being look like that would be interesting.
Marr takes 3D scans of people, creates molds in the shape of their bodies, and then pours molten liquid sugar into those molds.
The result is really so realistic, but then it has this very rough kind of surface, like you would imagine, a little bit porous like concrete, but then elements of glass as well. It has this glistening quality and this rough quality. It's like no other material you can work with for those elements. And yeah, so it's like a really glistening, beautiful representation of a human being.
Can I ask you to describe what one particular human form looks like that you have created?
Yeah, well, all they need to do is look in the mirror and imagine themselves as sugar, basically. But there was one big sculpture I made in a club in Berlin. You might know it if you've lived in Berlin, Berghain.
Mm-hmm. The most famous club in Berlin.
Yeah, indeed. And I was commissioned to make a sculpture for a bar that they have there. And I 3D scanned 10 people on the dance floor, like laying in different positions because it's quite a long kind of bar and we had to have everyone laying down. And so it's all of these kind of bodies entangled in each other. If you can imagine that like a Greek frieze, if you would see on those ancient Greek buildings, those fighting scenes, it was kind of similar to that, but like a different context because it's obviously a techno club. And I don't know if you know what goes on there, but it's a lot of fun.
Techno is what goes on there.
Yeah, exactly. Techno, only techno. But yeah, so that actual sculpture is inside a glass bar and you get your drinks on top of it. And so it's another instance of where people can come close to art. And as you said in your introduction, people aren't usually invited to touch art or lick art or get close to it. But I really like that people can interact. It's an interactive thing. Although I never encouraged people to actually taste the art. They did that all by themselves.
Okay, so let's get to the licking of the art. Yeah. When did you first notice people doing that?
I was part of an exhibition in Dresden, and that was in 2012. And yeah, the intention was to allow the sculptures to melt. So I didn't protect them with the resin, and I just put them there. And first of all, I noticed people like touching them with their fingers and then licking their fingers. And they were realizing quite quickly that the orange one actually tasted like Fanta.
So it was flavored too.
It's flavored, exactly. It's exactly like a lolly, but it's a human.
Lollipop for our American listeners.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't have a sign up saying don't touch, and I didn't have a sign up saying please touch, but people just went for it. And then they just started actually licking the sculptures directly. And even one woman held her baby up and was she was licking it. And I wasn't actually there for that moment, but I had a camera sort of hidden away so I could see what was happening.
You were spying on them.
Yeah, I was later. And I was like, oh my God, what are you doing, people? Like this, it was...
So this surprised you? This is not your intention?
Oh, absolutely. I never thought that anyone would do that. See, I would never do it because I wouldn't want to lick where someone else had licked before, but
sure,
it didn't really bother a lot of the other people. I don't know, I'm not germophobic, but I'm just like normal kind of person, really.
But as we have described, your sculptures look not like candy. I mean, they look like they would be tasty. So why did you not think that people were going to try to lick them?
Again, it didn't bother me that they did it. I just thought, I was allowing them to melt anyway, because basically with these exhibitions, I would put one that's protected and then one that's not protected so that you could see where it started from and then the transformation that would happen with the melting.
Oh.
So, I over like a few months where the exhibition would go that long, one of the sculptures would melt quite substantially. So That was my goal. But at the same time, humidity comes from the air, but also it comes from people licking sculptures too. So, look, I like to let people do what they want, within reason.
So then the licking actually became part of the art piece.
Yeah.
It would have sped up the degradation of the sculpture.
Absolutely. It did, yeah.
Were there any parts that were particularly licked?
Yeah, I'll leave that to your imagination. But I think people were really just in it for the taste. I don't think it got too erotic in any way. It just was really just they wanted to see, really, does this taste like a lollipop?
Have you ever tasted your sculptures?
Yeah. Yes, I have, because I'm the first one. I know nobody else has licked it. They taste great.
What are the flavors like other than Fanta?
Yeah, so every color in the rainbow. So there's one of my favorites is the cola sculpture, because it's quite like amber, and that's the one that's in Berkane actually. That's all cola, 300 kilos of cola, and it really does taste like cola. And there's also, you've got everything like raspberry and lemon and kiwi if you like, and all kinds of flavors and colors.
One of your more recent sculptures was an anatomical heart, somewhere around 8 feet tall, made of sugar. This one encased in glass outside in a Berlin park. And that one also had this element of participation. Can you tell me about that?
So it was quite this big kind of structure, and it was interactive as well. But you couldn't lick it, obviously. You could pedal bikes to generate power for an air conditioning unit inside this glass box. And that would then in turn keep the heart from melting. So you were, participating to save the heart from dying too quickly. And it got very, very hot in this box. It's basically a hothouse in the middle of a park. It's about life and death. So yes, the heart did die, but I think it would have died a lot quicker if nobody came to ride the bikes, because it got up to 50 degrees inside the box. So when people weren't participating.
Way over 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right, exactly.
What was the inspiration for this work?
Well, I'm very much attracted to Buddhism in some respects, and the Buddhists have these amazing distinctions on how we are attracted to things in our life and how we become attached to the things that we want. And the Buddhists say that the more you want something, the more you're attached to it. And I find that sugar is a wonderful metaphor for that, because it's got the attraction. It looks so beautiful. You want it because you know it's going to give you that hit. And it's also very sticky. So when you've got it, you imagine holding a lot of sugar in your hands as it's melting. It sticks to you. It's very hard to let go of. So it parallels this Buddhist sort of concept of attachment for me. But then also with the things like the heart, that's a totally different context. And that's more about like a living material, because sugar, if you cast it and then you pour it into something and you leave it outside, it will immediately start changing. It'll start melting and it will be affected, and it's like a living substance.
That's Berlin-based artist Joseph Marr talking about his sculptures that are really irresistible. Still ahead this hour, the U.S. has a long history with Iran. We'll look at how we got to this point with the Islamic Republic, plus a few more lighthearted stories for your Friday afternoon. You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. Conflict and upended oil markets predictably get people thinking about energy alternatives. That includes reconsidering construction materials, looking for options that don't rely on fossil fuels, or materials that make heating and cooling more efficient. In Colombia, homes with earthen walls have been making a comeback in recent years. And this story from our archives reporter Manuel Rueda takes us to a construction site.
In the town of Barichara, deep in the Andes Mountains, Julia Leon is building a 3-room house that's made mostly out of earth. To make the walls, Leon shoves dozens of pounds of damp earth in between 2 wooden panels. Then he climbs on top of this pile of soil and clay and pounds it repeatedly with a wooden stick. This kind of construction is called rammed earth, or tapia pisada in Spanish. It was one of the more popular ways of building homes in Colombia until the mid-20th century, when houses made of brick or cement became more common. Santiago Rivero is a civil engineer in Barichara, who promotes the use of rammed earth.
El ladrillo es quemado, el acero es quemado, el cemento es quemado.
Bricks or cement must be burnt in big furnaces, and that leads to carbon emissions, he says. Walls made of earth have a minimal environmental impact, Rivero explains, because they basically dry out in the sun.
El impacto ambiental realmente es mínimo.
Earth walls are also good at keeping homes cool during the day and storing heat at night, and that makes them more energy efficient.
Cuando el muro es de tierra en invierno se requiere 50%.
With earth walls, you need 50% less fuel for heating in the winter, Rivero says, and you also avoid the need for air conditioning. But making houses from rammed earth is slower and more labor-intensive, and it also requires more space, because walls made from rammed earth have to be at least 15 inches thick to hold up. But there are other ways for architects to introduce earth to urban areas. In Bogotá, Colombia's capital, the Tierra Tech factory makes small blocks of earth on a large scale. They look like bricks, and they're used to make the walls of homes or apartment buildings that have cement or iron frames. Workers make the 12-inch long blocks by dumping a mix of damp soil and a little cement into a press. Darío Angulo is the factory's owner.
La tierra cruda que se activa para que sea un producto.
Because these blocks haven't been cooked, they can absorb humidity and help to regulate temperature, he says. Angulo says it's been hard to convince some constructors to buy these blocks of compressed earth.
La gente no está informada, la gente no lo conoce.
People aren't well informed about earth walls, he says. They've been depicted as something that's dirty or something that's only for the poor. But demand for the compressed earth blocks has been growing over the past 10 years. Tierra Tech's blocks are currently being used to make a large housing development in a wealthy suburb of Bogotá that has more than 100 homes. In the small town of Barichara, meanwhile, tourism has been largely responsible for boosting interest in earth homes. The town gets thousands of visitors each year because of its colonial architecture, built originally with rammed earth technology. Its cobblestone streets are lined with whitewashed homes that have breezy courtyards and large windows that date back to the 18th century. Now, people who move into the town to retire or buy a vacation home are asking for their houses to be built in this style, says local architect Natalia Rey.
Now we have more value for this type of architecture because young people really want to learn this technique.
Rey makes buildings that are made mostly out of earth. She recently finished a luxurious hotel with a swimming pool in its courtyard, and a rural home that has large decks looking out into the forest.
It's like this mix between the traditional way of looking of the houses, but also with the comfort of the new houses.
Architects in Barichara say that if regulations in Colombia change and the construction sector is taxed more heavily for its carbon emissions, buildings made of earth and other sustainable materials could also start to make a comeback in other parts of the country. For the World, I'm Manuel Rueda, Bogotá.
The U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran came suddenly last weekend, but violence and tension between the three countries is not new. They've shared a complex relationship for much of the past century. And that's what we'll be digging into now. Naghmeh Sarabi joined us to discuss the history that set the stage for the current conflict. She is a professor of Middle East history at Brandeis University near Boston. I started by asking her to take us back to the early 1950s. That was the first time the United States, with British help, forced a leadership change in Iran.
The story goes back to 1951 when the Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the British Oil Company. At the time, the way it was that the Brits they built the infrastructure and they were extracting oil, and they got far larger share of the profits than the Iranians were. And by nationalizing it, Mohammad Mossadegh made a claim that the oil belonged to Iranians. It was an act of independence. So after that was when the British appealed to the Americans to help them regain control of oil profits in Iran. And through a whole series of events, the CIA got involved and conducted this coup. And when it was over, what happened was then that the Brits and the Americans each got a 40% share of the new oil company that took the place of the British Oil Company.
So then the Shah, this pro-Western monarch, was in charge, and relations were pretty good between Iran and the U.S. and Israel for a period?
Yeah, I would say it was very, very good between the three countries, although it's really important to remember that the main relationship here is between Iran and the United States. Because out of the 1953 coup, the Shah felt that what he needed more than anything else to survive is to build up a military that was loyal to him. And what that meant was that U.S.-Iran relationships happened primarily through large credits that the Iranians got, that the Shah got, in order to buy military equipment. And the other relationship that happens between the three is through the security forces. So in 1957, Iran creates its security intelligence force, which is called Savak in Persian. And it does that with the help of both, eventually, with the help of both the United States and Israel.
It's striking to think that the intelligence services of all three countries, from the perspective of today, were working together back then.
Absolutely, yes.
So then everything changed in Iran and in its relationship with the West with the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Just briefly remind us of what happened in that revolution.
The revolution took a while to come. And in the sense that it was connected to the United States, one of the most important parts of it happens actually in 1964, when the United States and Iran come to a status of forces agreement. And the reason that's important is that what Iran gives to the United States in return for more military credit was the fact that no American on Iranian soil would be prosecuted by Iranian judiciary. So it was kind of immunity of everybody, any American in Iran. And the reason that's important is that that was the moment in which Ayatollah Khomeini, rises as the leader of eventually what becomes the revolution. In other words, in some ways, Khomeini's fame is tied up to the fact that he was against the capitulation rights, and he gives a famous speech and eventually is exiled and is in exile for 15 years. I think it's really important for us to remember that the 1960s and 70s in the United States, in Europe, and all over the world, especially young people, are basically rising up and mobilizing against this idea of they're anti-imperialist, anti-colonial. The question of social justice is a very important global idea among the youth in particular. For the Iranians, this anti-imperialism meant something very specific, right? It was anti-American because of the 1953 coup. It was anti-Israel because of the way in which Israel and the United States were deeply connected, and the ways in which the Palestinian cause was a global cause for a lot of, again, young groups that were mobilizing. At the same time, you have Khomeini in exile. By fall of 1978, he really emerges as the leader of this umbrella group, right? These umbrella revolutionaries. Many of them leftist, many of them secular, many of them Islamic. They're a whole hodgepodge of groups, but they all come together under his leadership.
And then you have Khomeini, who had been this powerful religious figure in exile. He became the supreme leader of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Once he was solidly installed, what happens to U.S.-Iran relations then?
U.S.-Iran relations actually does not break up with the revolution. What breaks up U.S.-Iran relations is actually when a number of politically active students in November of 1979 climb up the walls of the U.S. Embassy, and they take over it in what we know as the 444 days of the U.S. hostage crisis. When they climb up the walls and take over the U.S. Embassy, that is when they kind of turn turned to the government, to both the transitional government and Ayatollah Khomeini, as in, okay, why we did this, what do we do now? And the most common narrative is that Khomeini then kind of gave a green light to what they were doing. But the transitional government actually was against that, and it resigns in protest. And you can think about it as a moment in which the Iranian Revolution and the Islamic Republic could have taken multiple paths, and the path that it then takes is towards more radicalization. And that's when diplomatic relations between the two countries absolutely breaks up.
I'm speaking with Naghmeh Sorabi, a professor of Middle East history at Brandeis University. So there was some movement in Iran in the 1990s, jumping forward here, to reconcile with the West. Iran's president at the time called to take down the, quote, wall of distrust, as he put it, between Iran and the U.S. Did relations thaw at all in that period?
I think what's more helpful to think about is less of did relations thaw and more did relationship between the two countries get worse. And so in some ways, thinking about it as a standstill in which it's not thawing, but it's also not ratcheting up the animosity becomes a really helpful way of thinking about the 90s in particular.
So another point on this timeline was that George Bush, after 9/11, included Iran in his list of countries that he called the axis of evil. Was that a further decline in the relationship there?
It was, because it was considered in some ways as a big betrayal. And I say that because after 9/11, Iran in Afghanistan in particular had been sharing intelligence with the United States because it felt that the Taliban were also its own enemy. So this was a case in which the interests of the two countries intersected. And the speech about Iran being part of the axis of evil really took them by surprise. And it becomes another moment in which the Iranians feel they just cannot trust the Americans.
So for decades, the U.S. and Israel were concerned about Iran building nuclear capabilities. And if we fast forward then to 2015, the U.S. and Iran actually come together, despite their differences, to sign the Iran nuclear deal. Can you remind us what that deal did and how it impacted, the standing of U.S., Iran, and Israeli relations?
What it did was that it found mechanisms to control Iran's nuclear program. So inspections, how much you can store, what percentage enriched uranium in return for sanctions relief. And I think it's important to remember that the JCPOA was purposefully built to be limited to Iran's nuclear program. It did not have other provisions for dealing with the animosity and hostility of Iran and the United States. It was purposely keeping the focus on how to best control the nuclear program.
JCPOA is the acronym for the Iran nuclear deal. A few years after this deal was signed, President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal. That was in his first term, about 2.5 years after it was implemented. How do you draw a line between that decision and what is happening today?
If you take for a second the U.S. motivations for the current war out of the equation, the line then would be that by getting rid of the deal and never putting another deal in place, you basically eliminated one method by which to actually have some kind of control over Iran's nuclear capacities. With that gone, you were left basically with three options, right? Renew a deal, continue with sanctions on the country, or go to war. And the Islamic Republic of Iran is a system in which its own survival, it's its number one priority. And so it ratchets everything up. In many ways, by not having a deal and getting rid of the deal, we were barreling our way towards a war or towards status quo, and clearly status quo was no longer an option. The reason I say it's a bit more complicated, or it's not so simple, is that we still do not know. The President Trump's administration has given multiple reasons for why this attack and why now and what the end goal is. And because we don't have clarity as to what decision makers in Washington are thinking about what constitutes a victory in this war, drawing a link between 2018 and this moment in terms of what is the end goal becomes very difficult.
When you try to wrap your head around what might come next for Iran, where do you look to in the past to help inform that?
I grew up in Iran in the 1980s when the 8-year bloody war with Iraq, which was the bloodiest conventional war in the 20th century between two countries, had happened. And I remember as a child, as a teenager, wondering if we were ever going to be released from this feeling and what it meant to constantly be thinking about death all the time. And those of us who lived through the Iran-Iraq war, and particularly the missiles and bombings of the cities, carry that trauma with us in different ways. We have dealt with it in different ways, but we have dealt with it in different ways. And I think back to that, and I think that at the end of the day, people's need to survive and need to live is a very, very strong instinct. And more and more people are going to die. Infrastructure is being just absolutely pummeled to smithereens. And I would say that today I was in touch with an Iranian journalist, and she wrote to me, "May we see each other in a free Iran." And I have to believe that that is one of the many possibilities in front of us.
That was Naghmeh Sorabi of Brandeis University, where she is a professor and research director at the Crown Center for Middle East Studies. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. The Paralympics officially begin today, and curling competitions have already started. This sport is a very big deal for a club of enthusiasts just outside Barcelona. The Vallvidrera Curling Club has never won a game. To be fair, they have not ever lost a game either. The team is kind of a joke, but now they've been invited to a real competition in Canada. The World's Jerry Haddon brings us the story of their quest for glory.
On the eve of the trip to Winnipeg, the Catalan curlers chant "undefeated, undefeated," which technically is true because they've never actually competed. That's the gag, made more believable with uniforms, a made-up centuries-old history, even a hymn. The club only convenes once a year in winter at the spot where they long to play, on the ice of a frozen reservoir that never actually freezes. Year after year, upon confirming there's no ice, they head off for brunch. Holding this whole charade together is a strict code of never breaking character, never winking for the cameras. In fact, the tactic duped some camera guys. When I first read about the club, says documentary filmmaker Tony Gonzalez, I thought it was real. I grabbed my camera and came down for a stone-tossing ceremony. Everyone was like, "What are you doing here?" he says. "You know this is fake, right?" I felt really stupid, but also inspired. Gonzalez's production company, La Parcela, has essentially joined the joke. It's shadowing the team on its week-long Canada trip. There, the club will step onto the ice for the first time.
Estaremos en 3 clubes de ahí de Winnipeg, los más grandes, y ya tenemos partidos.
We're going to play against Winnipeg's 3 best teams, Gonzalez says. Notice the inclusive we. We've got practices scheduled, he says, some retired legends as advisors, even access to sports psychologists should we need them. Gonzalez says, like him at first, the Canadians don't know this whole thing is a joke.
Que no lo saben. O sea, ellos piensan que es cierto. O sea, que tenemos siglo de historia.
They're in the dark, Gonzalez says. They think we're a real team with a centuries-old history, but that we've just never been able to play. The challenge, Gonzalez says, is to see how far and for how long they can maintain the fiction and capture it all in a film he hopes to enter in festivals.
Good morning, Winnipeg.
From Winnipeg, team captain Mark Samayuk sent me this voice memo today.
Pues aquí estamos ya, aterrizados a menos 16 grados, todo helado.
Here we are on the ground, he says. It's 16 degrees out and everything's frozen. We're about to play our first game. We could never curl at home, he says, but we're making it happen in Canada.
Jugarem, jugarem, jugarem.
We will play, he chants. We will play. And when they do, it will be historic, not just because the Catalans will feel the weight of a real curling stone for the first time as they struggle to sweep the ice without falling down, but also because it's the moment when fiction becomes nonfiction, when a gang of jokesters pretending to curl for 15 years actually play the game. For The World, I'm Sherry Haddon, Barcelona.
The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston. Find us online anytime at theworld.org. I'm Carolyn Beeler. Have a great weekend.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. LuminaFoundation.org. By the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Judy Piggott, the Gruber Family Foundation, the Schmidt Family Foundation, and Gavin Salmonese, LLC. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.